Hi, welcome back to this Wwise and FMOD comparison video series. In this video we're going to be creating a basic ambience in Wwise and applying it to our scene in Unreal. So let's jump straight into Wwise and have a look at how we can add some ambience. As you can see, this is where we left off last time in the footsteps video. We had a single footsteps event with motors, scrapes and switchable footstep surfaces. So we'll add a new folder under default work unit and we'll call this ambience. Now we're going to split ambience down into two different types. We're going to have emitters, which are placed around the scene, and a general 2D ambience bed. Right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create the bed. So if we just drag in the beds that we have, that is for this scene, we have a couple of dynamic wind loops. Open this up and you can see them in there. Now if we're going to match what we did in FMOD, we're also going to need some sort of scatter effect with multiple samples, which are the birds for nature. So we'll create a random container, call this birds, and drag in our bird samples. So there are all the birds. Let's have a listen to our wind samples. There they are. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is make sure that these loop. Just go to the General Settings tab and hit Loop, and we want it to loop infinitely. And we'll do the same for the howling wind as well. So that will also loop. Now let's go to the birds container, and we have 7 samples in here which will trigger at random in a random order, but that will happen indefinitely throughout the scene. So let's randomize the pitch so it doesn't become too repetitive. And we'll also randomize a low pass just to kind of give the effect that they're coming at distances, because high frequencies are not as prevalent from a high distance object. Great. And we'll randomize the volume as well. We won't do the maximum, we'll just do the minimum. We'll go minus 5. There we go. Okay, let's just bring the overall volume down a touch and let's play it. I hope you can hear that. They are playing. So at the moment it will just play the 7 samples and then stop. So let's just click play mode and hit continuous and loop. And we'll also need some sort of polyphony. So we could have more than one sample playing at once. So if you hit the transitions and go to trigger rate, we'll just change this to 4. And then we'll randomize another 4 on top of that. So you should hear now, you may get more than one sample playing at once. So let's hit play and see how that sounds. You should be able to hear that there's a random gap in between each sample. We want to have a relatively decent gap so it's not just a cacophony of birds. But that's also all straight down the middle. So we want some 3D panning so it feels like they're around you as well. So if we go to the positioning tab and go to the drop-down box and go to 3D, because that will make it the sound source localized. Now go to the position source and click user defined and click edit. And in here we can set a kind of surround sound path, which you can adjust in this section over here. Let's just go and click new path, and we'll call this birds random pan. Why not? And click it, and we're just going to have it in the middle to start with, and then we'll randomize each of these. So we'll randomize left and right. Let's just make that 80, 80, and 80. Okay, so that should do it. So that should randomize the location of the birds. So let's hit play and see what that sounds like. You notice there's more than one playing at once. We'll just bring the volume down because they're going to be quite loud compared to the bed. In fact, we'll probably just add an effect here just to trim off the high frequencies even more, just to make them sound a little bit more in the distance. We'll get a low pass. There's quite a good list of effects in here. If you double click it, they've got their own parameters you can adjust. So let's just low cut to a relatively reasonable level. Bring the volume down and just change that to -3. There we go. I think we'll also just bring this down a touch. Okay, so let's add all of these sounds to a single event. Select them all, right click, and let's create a play event. And we'll call this ambience. Ambience bed. Okay, there it is. Let's play it. Should be able to hear some random birds in the background. Sounds more like a windy English seaside to me. However, we're going to use that today. So let's close down birds. We've created our bed, and let's add some emitters that will work in specific areas in the scene. If you remember our scene, there's not a whole lot going on in it, but there are fire pits and there's also a sea. So that's what we'll add to the emitters. We'll have our sea loop, which you can see there, and we'll also need the fire loop. Drag that in and import. Okay, great. So these emitters are going to be 3D sounds. If you notice from the birds, we had this as a 3D sound, so it has more of a stereo spread and a locality to it. These are just 2D, which means they will just play at a constant level as soon as they're initiated. So for fire, we want to switch it to 3D. And let's create an attenuation for it so you can see what distance it attenuates. In fact, instead of creating it just for this, you can create a share set item, and we'll create one under attenuations. And this can then be shared between any sound that you like, because it comes up in the drop-down box. Okay, so let's go back to fire, and you'll see our fire in the drop-down box there. So let's edit this, and that's our fire sound. So it's distance on the x-axis, and it's output level on the y-axis. This is the curve in the middle. If you just double-click it, you can adjust the curve. Let's stick a few points on there. And we want it to be relatively loud up close with a bit of a tail. You can add different curve types in here to really smooth it out, but we won't bother. There are other attenuation options down here, which you can see. We will do a low pass just to make it feel more natural when you get a bit further out. Let's hit play, have a listen. You can see that's pretty unnatural, so we're just going to bring that effect down a fair bit. Oh, that's cut off there. We'll deal with that in a second. All right, that sounds pretty good. So let's close that down. Just make sure that fire's looping, because the reason it cut off a minute ago is because we hadn't set it to loop. So that should do it for fire. Let's go to C and make sure that bad boy's looping. Have a listen. Sounds good. Let's go to positioning and make it 3D, and we'll do something similar to what we did with fire. Go to attenuations and hit new, make it C, and you'll see it automatically goes into share sets there. So let's go ahead and edit the attenuation. And we'll just leave the curve as linear, and we'll do a max distance of 2000. We want quite a larger area of effect with the C. Okay, so let's make events for each of these sounds. Let's make a fire event, and we'll call this one fire, surprisingly enough. And we'll make a C event and call it C. Great. Great. So let's get these events we've just created over into our sound bank so we can generate it and push it over into Unreal. So let's select these, drag them over into the master sound bank, and now we have all of our events in our sound bank, so we can just go up and hit save and generate. That's all we're going to do in Wwise for now. So let's switch over to Unreal and have a look about how we can implement these. Here's our scene. Let's have a look at how we can add a 2D sound event to this. We'll add a Wwise ambient sound. So let's just type in AK ambient sound, drag that in, raise it up a little bit. Now we don't actually have the events to put into this just yet. So let's just go into the Wwise folder, go to events, and generate the sound banks. Now we should be synced up with Wwise. Go to Wwise Picker, and there's our events. That's all of them there. So we'll drag in what we just created, which are these. Put them in, and we need to assign each of these to the master sound bank. You may choose to make different sound banks depending on which type of sound you're putting into this scene, and you probably might benefit from actual mixers within Wwise, but we won't bother doing that today. So we want our sound to be associated with this. Let's select it. And on the right-hand side, just select our ambience bed, which we created. Now that is associated with that. However, you will notice that if we play our game, that the ambience hasn't triggered, it's not playing. And that is because we still need to set it up at a blueprint level in order to initiate and trigger the sample when the scene starts. You can do this on a couple of blueprint levels, but the easiest way is probably to put it straight into the level blueprint. And all we need to do is just initiate the sound as soon as the scene begins. So we'll get an event begin play, and we'll drag this out, and we'll just start all ambience. We won't put a stop all ambience in at this point because we're not transitioning between scenes. So compile and save. Just takes a second. Okay, close this down. And now let's have a little look around and have a play and see if we've got our sounds. There they are. Sounds pretty windy. You should be able to hear the birds just going off in the background. Now we can give this fire pit a bit of love so we can get a little bit of a toasty, warm feeling coming from that fire. So let's add another AK ambient sound. Let's put it up above the fire. And we will select the fire event. You'll notice you can also adjust the distance attenuation here directly from Unreal. If I just show you, we'll just make that 9. Actually, that's a little bit too far, I think. Let's just reselect it. And we'll make that a little bit smaller. You don't want to hear it from that far back because there's quite a lot of sound sources here. They'll end up doubling up. Let's have a listen to that and see what that sounds like. There's a fire sound. Sounds toasty. Awesome. It's a little quiet. We had to get the camera right on top of it to actually hear it. So let's go back in and just make this area slightly bigger. Okay. So we can just copy this event to all the other fire pits in the scene. We could either just drag it straight out of here and place it where we want it, or we can copy and paste the actual blueprint and move it over. A little bit of a faff. I'm sure there must be an easier way to position stuff, but there we go. Let's have a look from above. There we go. That's pretty much bang on top of it. Can we hear it? There we go. Sounds like a fire. And also you notice that's 3D because you can hear the stereo spread and the locality of it. So what we're going to do with our C event. Let's just walk over here. We see we've still got the footsteps changing there. And this is where we're going to add our C emitter. Directly central, but with quite a distance so you can hear it from quite far off. So let's zoom out, drag in an AK ambient sound, add C, and then let's make this area quite a bit bigger than it actually is. Let's put it into position. There we go, about there should do it. And let's make this a lot bigger. Okay, it's probably a little bit too far forward. That a little bit bigger. Now you should be able to hear it from the kind of side path and also from the seafront. So let's have a little listen and see how it sounds. Can we hear it from here? Yes, we can. Let's hear what it sounds like up close. Sounds pretty nice. Sounds like quite a pleasant place to be honest. Just a normal Brighton day. Just as windy in England as well. Anyway, so that's pretty much it for this video. We're going to have to move over to music now. The next video is going to be creating a music system within Wwise. You can either jump straight over to that video, or you can go over and have a look at the FMOD comparison video and see how creating ambience in that piece of software compares.